Imagine sitting alone under flickering fluorescent lights at 3 a.m. The air hums, the clock ticks, and the world outside has gone silent. Then, you feel it, that prickle on the back of your neck, the heavy sense that someone's watching you. But you're alone, aren't you? A hotel clerk sees a guest who never existed. A gas station worker finds her name whispered by a man who shouldn't know it. Another spots cars with no license plates waiting just beyond the light. And a motel attendant watches a pale hand rise from under his desk to ring the bell. Each story is true. Each one happened on a night just like this one. So before you lock the doors and tell yourself you're safe, maybe think again. Because sometimes, the things we fear most aren't ghosts. They're people who know exactly where we are. Welcome to the channel where darkness never sleeps. Hit subscribe if you dare to stay up tonight. The night always started the same, way quiet, still, and heavy with a hum of machines. I worked the night shift at a small hotel, the kind of place that only ever saw tired travelers or truckers too exhausted to care where they slept. 3 floors, 40 rooms, and an empty lobby that always smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. I liked the silence. The stillness of it made the hours slip by faster, but that night the silence felt wrong. It wasn't the kind of quiet that made you calm, it was the kind that made your pulse start to whisper that something was off. It began just after 11 when the man buzzed to be let in. He looked ordinary enough, mid-40s, baseball cap, faded jeans, a backpack slung over one shoulder. But there was something hollow in his eyes. Like the lights were on, but nobody was home. I told him the rate. He nodded, slid his card across the counter, and I checked him into room 214. The system accepted the card, the receipt printed, and everything seemed normal, except for the way he stared at me a moment too long before leaving. 4 seconds, maybe 5, but long enough to make my stomach tighten. I watched him disappear into the elevator, then sat back down, the hotel once again falling into its soft, empty rhythm. I scrolled through my phone, half watching the security cameras, half listening to the buzz of the vending machines. Around midnight, I looked up and he was back, sitting on the couch across from the TV that wasn't even turned on. He didn't say anything, didn't look at me, just sat perfectly still, facing the blank screen like he was watching something I couldn't see. At first I thought maybe he couldn't sleep. Guests sometimes came down for coffee or to kill time. But after 30 minutes of him doing nothing, not scrolling through his phone, not moving, not even fidgeting, I started to feel the weight of it. The way his presence filled the room without making a sound. When I got up to grab a drink from the vending machine, I could feel his eyes follow me across the lobby. Not subtly, not out of curiosity. He tracked me like a predator measuring distance. I didn't dare look at him, but I felt this gaze crawling across my back. When I returned to the desk, I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just paranoid. But then, around 1 in the morning, I checked the occupancy list. Room 214 was listed as vacant. I blinked, refreshed the page. Still vacant. No payment, no check-in record. The transaction I had made earlier, the one that printed a receipt, was gone. My hands felt cold against the keyboard as I double-checked the logs. Nothing. It was as if he'd never existed. I called the room, but there was no answer. Then I checked the electronic key log. No entry recorded. The door hadn't been opened all night, which meant he never went there. He never even tried. My throat felt tight as I looked back at the lounge.
Sir, can
he
you
was
explain
still
what
there.
happened?
Same spot. Same empty stare. The TV reflected the faint light from the ceiling. And in that reflection, his face looked almost waxy. 15 minutes crawled by before I finally worked up the nerve to approach him. I asked if everything was okay. He turned to me slowly, his face unreadable, and said, "Just couldn't sleep." His voice was too calm, too quiet, like he was trying not to wake something. Then he turned back toward the blank TV. I nodded and went back behind the counter, pretending to check emails while my hands trembled under the desk. Around 2, I realized he was gone. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. My heart jumped. I scanned the lobby, the hallways, the shadows between the vending machines. Then I saw him half hidden in the dark, near the bathrooms, standing perfectly still, not doing anything, just watching. I pretended to type, glancing at him in the reflection of the computer screen. He didn't move for several minutes. Then, without a word, he walked back to the couch and sat down again. I called my manager. She told me to keep an eye on him, to call the police only if he did something threatening. I remember staring at him through the glass window of the office and thinking, he already is. Every few minutes, I checked the security feed. He wandered the halls, stood in corners where the light didn't reach, went into the stairwell and stayed there. Sometimes he appeared on camera, sometimes he didn't. I started to realize I wasn't watching him anymore, was watching me. By 3:30, I couldn't take it. I called the non-emergency police line, explained that there was a man in the hotel who I didn't think was a guest. They said officers were on the way. While I waited, he moved again, this time closer, 15 feet away from the desk, just standing there, eyes locked on me. He didn't blink, didn't speak. I tried to act normal, but my chest felt tight, my breath shallow. The buzzer went off around 3:50. I thought the police had arrived, but it was just another guest. I let him in quickly. The man in the lounge turned his head slowly and watched the guest cross the lobby, following him with his eyes like a hunter tracking movement in the woods. That was when I knew for sure whatever he was planning, it wasn't good. When the guest disappeared down the hall, the man vanished again. I checked the cameras and froze. He was standing outside one of the occupied rooms, just standing there, facing the door. My pulse spiked. I grabbed the phone and called 911 this time. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher what was happening. She said help was on the way. For 3 agonizing minutes, I watched the monitor. The man didn't move. Then, just as suddenly, he walked back toward the lobby. When he returned, he leaned over the counter, his face inches from mine, and whispered, "Is there any food?" His voice was so low it barely sounded human. I told him about the vending machines. He smiled just barely and turned away. That smile stayed in my head long after he walked off. Finally, at 4:10, flashing lights filled the parking lot. 2 officers entered, and I pointed straight to the lounge. The man was sitting again, waiting like he belonged there. They spoke to him quietly, asked for his ID, then escorted him outside. One of the officers came back and told me the man wasn't a guest at all. The credit card he used was stolen. He had no bags, no reservation, no reason to be there. He had simply used the card to get past the locked doors. They charged him with trespassing and fraud. But even after they left, I couldn't stop shaking. For hours, I watched the security feed, half expecting him to reappear in some corner of the screen. The part that haunts me isn't just that he was there for hours, it's that he could have done anything to anyone, and no one would have known until morning. Now, every time I hear the lobby doors buzz open, I get that same cold pulse of dread, because I know what it feels like to let danger walk right through the front door and hand it a key. My name is Meredith, and for a long time I told myself I liked the quiet. I worked the late shift at a tiny gas station off a county road that most drivers only notice when a dashboard light begged them to pull over. The building was a pale box of buzzing lights and linoleum, the kind of place where time does not pass so much as collect in the corners. On good nights I stocked the cooler, wiped the coffee station, and wrote silly little messages on the whiteboard to make the regulars smile. On bad nights, the silence settled on my shoulders like a weight, and every creak sounded like a step. That was the kind of night when he walked in. He looked like he had been cut out of an old photo and pasted into my present. A green coat that had seen years of winters, hair a little wild, lips so dry they looked painful. He did not head for the chips or the coffee. He just stood by the end cap and watched me in a way that felt like he already knew what I would do next. I said hello, because that was my job. He asked if I always worked this late. I said mostly. There was a pause that stretched too long. His mouth tugged up like he had just confirmed something. Then he said my name. There was no name tag on my shirt. Hearing it out loud made the room tilt. I tried to play it off with a small laugh, the kind you use when you do not want to show your throat. He gestured at the whiteboard where I had written that cinnamon coffee had returned, and he talked about handwriting like he was giving a weather report. Most people dot their letters with neat circles. You use slashes. It is careful and quick. The way he said careful and quick made the hairs on my arms rise. He did not buy anything. He lingered just long enough to pass the line between polite and wrong. Then he said he was Paul, and walked out into a cloud of fog that the floodlights could not quite shred. After that, he became a habit of the night. Not every night. That would have been too simple. Some weeks I would glimpse his car at the far edge of the lot with the lights off while I counted change.
Can I help
Another
you?
week would pass with nothing at all, and I would start to unclench, only for the chime above the door to ring, and there he would be. Hands in his coat pockets, eyes taking inventory of my movements. He would buy a water. He would ask a question that sounded harmless if you wrote it down, but the timing of it felt like a hand on the back of my neck. Do you get lonely out here? Are you ever scared being alone at night? His voice was calm and curious, like he was asking the price of gum, and that calm was the worst part of it. I changed little things in my routine. I checked the back room door twice instead of once. I kept my phone on the counter instead of in my pocket. I parked under the brightest camera. When I walked to my car at dawn, I held my keys like I was ready to open every door in the world in a single second. I told myself that fear would not make me smaller. Then, one night, when the air had the taste of rain but nothing fell, I finished a 10-minute break in the storage area and found a Polaroid on the counter. It was me, cropped close, refilling the bin of windshield fluid behind the station. The angle meant the photographer had been very near. There was no note, only a red ink circle around the slash in the letter that I had written on the label. My name was not on the photo. It did not need to be. The next time he came in, I told him to leave. I said if he stayed, I would call the police. My voice shook, and I hated that it did. He looked at me with a patient expression that made me feel like I was the one who had missed something. He said he had been too forward and that he noticed things because that was his nature. He said some people cannot help paying attention. He asked if it would have been easier if he smiled more and bought a soda every night. He named things that should have been invisible to him. The way my shoes were a little too large, the small twitch in my left eyelid when the clock rolled past 2 in the morning. I did not answer. I dialed. He did not try to stop me. When the officers arrived, he did not argue. They found a notepad in his car with dates and times and routes, a tiny list of my life as if it were a delivery schedule. One page had my name written in loops that grew smaller until they tangled into a gray bruise of pencil. The restraining order came through quickly. For a few days after that, the air tasted lighter. I transferred to another station 2 hours away and tried to convince my body that the danger had been folded up and filed in a courthouse. I changed the curtains in my apartment and learned a new set of regulars. I told my mother that fresh starts were good for the soul. At night, though, when I drove home along a county road with only fields as witness, I watched my mirrors like they were telling a story, and I felt a throb of fear whenever headlights lingered too long. Every once in a while, a car behind me would make the same turn I made, and my pulse would go hard in my throat until it kept going straight. What stayed with me most were the small details that felt like proof that I had not imagined any of it. The ghost print of his fingertip on the polished counter that the cleaner did not quite erase. The way the security feeds sometimes fuzzed just when a car idled at the edge of the frame. The memory of him standing inside, not touching anything, as if he wanted to leave no trace but wanted me to know he had been there. After the order, the officer suggested I vary my routine more. I started taking my breaks at uneven times and leaving my car in a different space. I learned which truckers were kind and which strangers wanted their kindness to cost me something. I began to recognize that there are people who do not raise their voice or their hands. They only pry at the edges of your life until the door opens by itself. On my last week before the transfer, a regular came in for coffee and asked why I looked so tired. I told him I had been dreaming in fragments, always the same images. A whiteboard, a felt tip, circle around a letter, a pair of eyes that looked at me like a puzzle that had already been solved. He told me that was my mind doing spring cleaning. He told me fear leaves slowly, one drawer at a time. I wanted to believe him. On my final night, I erased the board, and for once I did not write a cute message. I wiped the marker clean from my fingers and stood there listening to the hum of the lights. The lot outside was empty. The air felt like a held breath. When the chime rang, I startled so violently, I almost knocked over the coffee carafe. It was only a delivery driver with a crate of bottled water and a quick smile, but my hands shook as I signed his sheet. I still hear his voice sometimes when a stranger says my name. It had a way of flattening the sound, like he had practiced it in a room by himself and polished off all the warmth. I think of how he called his behavior curiosity, as if attention could be neutral when it narrowed itself around a single person, and pressed in. I changed towns, I changed jobs, I changed the route I walk inside my apartment from door to couch to window. What I cannot change is what I learned, that danger does not always announce itself with a shout. Sometimes it stands 3 feet from the counter and reads you like a list until you feel yourself turning into an object under glass. I still like the quiet. I just no longer trust it to be harmless. I work the overnight shift at a small gas station, where the glow of the canopy lights turns the asphalt into a slick mirror and the crickets do most of the talking. It is the kind of place people only notice when their fuel light has a tantrum or they realize the map has been lying to them. On quiet nights, I can hear the hum of the refrigerators from the far aisle. On bad nights, the glass in the front doors feels thinner than it should. This started on a Thursday around 2:30 in the morning, the hour when the world feels like it is holding its breath. My coworker Max dropped by with his friend Ben to grab coffee, and judging by the giggles, to ride out the tail end of some mushrooms. They were harmless and goofy, and for once the laughter made the building feel less empty. We were talking about nothing that mattered when Ben squinted toward the dark edge of the lot and said there was a car parked out there with its lights off but the engine still running. He said he had already asked the driver what he was doing, and the guy had said he was waiting on a DoorDash pickup. That would not have been strange, except I had not received an order in nearly 2 hours. The terminal had been stubbornly blank, while I was in the back room scrubbing mop buckets and inventorying paper towels. I could not see the far edge of the lot from the register because of the way the wall cuts off the view. So when I stepped out front and tried to look, all I saw was a pocket of darkness past the pumps. The canopy lights never reached that far. We chalked it up to a weird coincidence, and the guys went back outside to smoke and play with Max's dog under the humming lights. After an hour, they came in for more coffee, and Max seemed less amused. He told me the car was still there, and that from the angle they could see the driver kept shifting between staring at them and looking down at his phone like he was waiting on a cue. When Ben wandered over still, way too bold for that hour, and asked what the man was doing, the driver tried to pretend he did not speak English. Then he changed course, said he had the wrong address, and got ready to leave so fast it looked rehearsed. Max said the car looked brand new and had no license plates. He also noticed blankets piled in the back seat in a way that felt like they were hiding the shape of something. While Ben was talking to the first car, a second car rolled in with its lights off and pulled into another far corner. No plates on that one either. When the first car began to pull away, the second eased out behind it like the two were attached by a rope. Max and Ben stuck around another 15 minutes. When they left, they told me to be careful and keep an eye out. I was alone again, the way the job is designed. I told myself there were a dozen boring explanations for cars that behaved like shadows. I wiped the counter, stocked the lids, checked the door to the back room for the 3rd time. Around dawn, Max stopped by sober, hair still damp from a shower, and we went over everything again. He said the driver watched the entrance, the corners, my movements through the glass, The part that made my stomach drop was when he said the man seemed to relax only when the lot was empty. I spent that whole day telling myself fear is just a series of what-ifs dressed up like a plan. The next night proved me wrong. It was just after 3 a.m. when a group of 4 guys came in, loud in that way people get when they are trying to fill a strange room with normal noise. They grabbed coffee, snacks, and traded jokes that bounced off the linoleum. One of them asked if I knew anything about a car idling at the far end of the lot with its lights off. It was a newer Subaru, he said, and it looked like 2 men were arguing in the front. The words dropped into me like a stone. I asked what car. He pointed out the window like I should be able to see through the wall. I told him a car with that exact description had been out there the night before, and the driver did the wrong address routine when anyone got close. The leader of the group said they had noticed the car as soon as they pulled in to fill their truck. As they walked toward the store, they passed close enough to see the men inside talking with sharp faces, and one of them kept pointing toward the entrance, as if counting steps. When the group angled toward the Subaru, the driver suddenly threw it in reverse and backed away, then crept out of the lot, as if he did not want to make sound. I could picture it too easily. The rear lights flaring, and then the darkness swallowing the car again. The men looked at me like they were calculating risk. One asked if I wanted them to hang around a bit, just in case. I am not proud that my voice cracked when I said yes, but I am glad it did. They lingered near the door and by the coffee station, talking about nothing, creating a normal that the room could cling to. 20 minutes passed. The lot remained ordinary. A tractor trailer whooshed by on the road. A pair of raccoons investigated the dumpster with the focus of jewel thieves. The canopy lights hummed like a held note. The Subaru did not return. When the men finally left, they told me to keep the door locked whenever I could, and offered the kind of nod strangers give when they have decided, however briefly, to be responsible for you. I topped off their coffees and watched their taillights fade into a line of red that winked out at the curve. The rest of that shift was uneventful if you measure by events but not by heartbeat. I kept glancing at the far corner I could not see, the blind spot that now felt like a mouth. I put off taking the trash to the pumps until the sun lifted the black off the lot by a few shades. I reminded myself that fear is also data, that my body knows things my brain is too polite to say aloud. When my replacement arrived, I walked her through the last 2 nights. I told her to trust a feeling even if she could not put it into the logbook. What claws at me even now is how the danger worked. It did not knock on the door. It parked in a place the cameras barely reached and waited for opportunities to collect themselves. It picked a spot where the wall blocked the view from the register. It idled with the lights off, but the engine on. A quiet readiness. When attention turned its way, it changed languages, changed stories, changed direction. It did not want a scene. It wanted a window with no witnesses. The blankets in the back seat. The second car shadowing the first. The way they returned the next night at almost the same time, like they were testing the locks on a schedule. None of it proves anything. All of it points the same way. I have a small knife in my pocket because I am not foolish. I also know a knife is no magic charm against a plan with multiple moving parts. What I have now is a map in my head of the lot, a new understanding of how light fails, and a promise I made myself that I would ask for company even if it makes me feel needy. There are nights in this job when the scariest thing is your own imagination. There are other nights when your imagination is the only reason you notice the pattern forming in the dark. I am grateful for the men who stayed that night. I am grateful for the dog that made Max linger the night before. I am grateful for every ordinary interruption that kept a bad plan from finding its moment. I tell myself that next time I will call sooner, even if all I have is a feeling and a description of a car, with no plates at the edge of the world. My name is Daniel, and I know the sounds of the building the way a sailor knows water. The lobby clock clicks once every second and a little more loudly at the top of the minute. The soda machine breathes in a patient way. The front door gives a thin electric buzz whenever a guest uses a key card after midnight. Even the heating unit has a rhythm to the way it wakes and settles. On most nights, those sounds braid together into a kind of lullaby that lets the hours pass without argument. On this night, they felt like clues I had not learned to read yet. It was a Tuesday in late fall and the parking lot was a black sheet with a few cold coins of light where the cameras caught the edges. We had a handful of rooms filled, and the road outside was empty enough that the world might as well have been paused. I sat in the back office with a show playing on my laptop, the volume low so I could hear the bell at the front desk if someone came in. Around 2 a.m, the bell rang. It was loud and precise. I stood up at once and walked to the lobby, already forming the smile you have to wear when a traveler arrives tired and short on patience. There was nobody standing at the counter. The lobby sat as I had left it, 2 chairs in front of the picture window, the brochure rack, the desk bell shining like a small coin under the overhead light. I looked through the glass doors to the lot and saw no headlights, no movement, only the silvery smear of my own reflection. I told myself a draft might have nudged the metal spring inside the bell, even though I knew that did not make sense. I waited a minute, then 2, then went back to the office. 10 minutes later, the bell rang again. It was impossible to mistake it for imagination. There is a sharpness to that sound that writes itself into your ribs. I walked faster this time, turned the corner ready to say hello, and again found the room empty. The chair behind the desk waited for me. The bell was still. The carpet looked almost like water in the night lighting. I stepped outside onto the concrete to scan the lot in case someone had rung and fled as a joke. But the air was still, and the only motion was a moth batting at the glass, like it wanted to come inside and learn English. I went back in and decided to stop giving the unknown the benefit of the doubt. Instead of retreating to the lounge, I settled into the chair behind the counter, angled so I could see the bell and most of the lobby without moving my head. I dimmed the lights until the room felt like a waiting room in a dream. Minutes passed with the slow clarity that fear gives to time. I could hear the compressor in the mini fridge click on and off. I could hear my own breathing shape itself to match the building. The bell rang. I did not imagine it. I was looking right at it when the top depressed and jingled. But it was not the bell that moved first. A pale hand slid up over the edge of the counter from the space beneath and pressed the button down with 2 slow fingers. The skin looked bloodless. The nails were trimmed close. There was a tiny white scar along one knuckle like a chalk mark. It took a heartbeat to understand what I was seeing. Then my chair scraped the floor. I was already backing up, and the hallway to the back office felt longer than it had ever felt before. I reached the office door, stepped through, slammed it, and locked it with hands that forgot how to be steady. I stood with my ear to the wood, waiting for a sound that did not come. The room smelled like coffee and disinfectant. My eyes jumped from the door to the security monitor and back again until I forced myself to look at the feed. The lobby camera showed the tilted angle of the desk and the empty space in front of it. My chair sat at a crooked angle. I stared until the grain of the video made a snowstorm in my vision. In the lower left corner, something moved. A head rose above the counter, not suddenly, but with the slow confidence of someone who believes they cannot be stopped. A hood hid the shape of the hair. The face was a blur of angles that the camera could not resolve. The eyes found the camera lens and held it with a patient curiosity that made my throat go dry. I called 911 and kept my voice low, because speaking any louder felt like giving something away. I told the dispatcher that someone was in the lobby and that he had been hiding under my desk. She told me to stay in the office with the door locked and to keep talking until officers arrived. While I spoke, the man crawled out into full view and stood. He was tall, shoulders rounded, as if to make himself take up less space. He walked to the glass doors and looked outside like he was waiting for a ride. He drifted to the brochure rack and began to flip through the papers with a kind of bored ceremony, as if he were killing time while an appointment ran late. Then he turned away from the camera and walked toward the hallway that led to my door. The knob rattled. Not a frantic rattle. One careful twist, as if confirming what he already knew. I put my hand against the metal and could feel the faint vibration of contact. The dispatcher asked me to tell her whether he was trying to force the door, and I could not answer for a long 2 seconds because it felt as if the room had narrowed to a single hinge. The knob went still. The footsteps retreated. He reappeared in the lobby and paced, sometimes vanishing from the frame and returning on a slightly different line, like he was mapping the place in his head. Time stretched. It became a thin wire that hummed and did not break. Then, the parking lot camera caught 2 neat flares of light as police cruisers turned in. The red and blue washed over the asphalt and the glass in my hands even though I was in the back. The man moved away. A shadow moves when a door opens. He slipped out of frame. I heard the front door open, the officers announcing themselves with professional calm, and then the murmur of a search that led nowhere. They found a rock near the threshold, the kind you might use to hold a door open if you wanted to come and go without a sound. They did not find him. The officers told me he must have slipped out as soon as the lights touched the lot. There are blind spots in every building, and some people seem to feel them like drafts. I filed the report with a pen that did not want to cooperate. My signature looked like someone else had written it. The officers told me to keep the office door locked whenever I was in the back, to adjust the lobby camera to cover more of the counter, to call the moment anything felt off rather than after the second or third time. They used the word trespass, and it sounded too small for the way the hand looked when it crept into view and pressed the bell with a polite touch. I replay the footage in my mind more often than I should. The part that clings to me is not the rattle at the door or the pacing. It is the knowledge that he had likely been under there for some time before I saw him, patient and still, and no more than a few feet away while I sat where I always sit. I think about how that bell had called me into an empty room twice before, the way a fisherman flicks a line to test a surface. I think about the confidence of that touch on the bell, how it felt like a rehearsal that had finally found its stage. I still work nights. The building did not change, the sounds did not change. What changed is the way I listen. When the door buzzes for a late guest, I feel a small cold rise in me, and I check the angles before I move. I keep the lobby lights a little brighter. I keep the desk area clear so there is nowhere for a body to fold itself small. People ask why the job scares me, and I tell them it is not the emptiness that does it. It is the discovery that someone else can live inside that emptiness with you, so close you could touch, and you will not know it until a bell rings in the dark.